All right, it's good to see all of you. Happy to have another opportunity to study in the book of Acts. Last time we got through the end of chapter 11, and we're ready to look at Acts chapter 12 this morning. In this chapter, you have the Apostle James beheaded, Peter imprisoned, Peter being released and then leaving the city, Herod putting the guards to death, the death of Herod, and then the word continuing to grow and the return of Barnabas and Saul from their mission to distribute money to the needy saints that are in the churches of Judea. All right, before we enter in, let's have a word of prayer before we start. Brother Larry, will you direct our minds, please? Amen. All right, chapter 12, verse 1. Now about the time we left, you read the verses right above that we studied last week, about the time that they got the prophecy about the famine, and they gave the contribution at Antioch, and the apostle Barnabas and Saul were taking that money down to the elders in Judea. About that same time is when all of these events take place. So kind of overlaps what we were studying at the very end of the chapter above. And about that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. So we've got a Herod here, Herod the king. This Herod is Herod Agrippa I. There are a lot of Herods. And Herod the Great was the Herod, of course, when Jesus was born, and that the wise men came to, and that put the babies to death. Then there's Herod's son Archelaus, who was in Judah, and when Joseph and Mary came back, and they decided they'd go to Galilee and go back to Nazareth instead of staying in Judea. And then you have Herod Agrippa, or Herod Antipas, is the Herod in charge of Galilee and Perea at the time of John the Baptist and Jesus. Now this is a different Herod. This is Herod the king, as Luke calls him. He gets the title given to him of king by Caesar Gaius, or Caesar Caligula is the name we usually know him by, his nickname. And he was made a king. And he was given charge over even all of the territory that had belonged to Herod the Great. And he wanted to please the Jews, and he starts persecuting the church. So these events take place near the year 44 A.D., because shortly after this, he's going to be dead. And we know from secular historians like Josephus that he died in 44. So, there's certain anchor points as far as dates as you go through the book of Acts when these events happen. The death of Herod Agrippa I is one of them. We know, these things can't be after 44 because that's when he died. And again, he's only spoken of in this chapter. He was born in 10 B.C., son of Aristobulus and Bernice. That's another name we're going to hear later. He is the grandson of Herod the Great. Here is I put this chart up before looking at the Herod family. You can see it's pretty complicated. We have all of these people mentioned in secular history and in the writings of Josephus, who lived in the first century. And started with Antipater, was kind of the father of this big family, but then you have Herod the Great. You see the little crown on his head there in the picture, because he was a king, and he's mentioned there in the Gospels in the very beginning. He was the one in charge. He died in about 4 B.C., so we know Jesus and was born a little bit before that, according to our calendar that we have. And then you come down here, you see Archelaus coming through, one of his wives there that ruled in Judah. And then he got replaced by a Roman governor to take his place. He was so corrupt. And then you see this Herod Antipas. He comes from another one of the wives there. And he is the one that had John the Baptist beheaded and was there at the trial of Christ. And his people mocked Jesus, but he didn't find any reason to condemn him to death. Then over there in this same line, you have Agrippa over there with the crown on his head. And that's this Herod we're talking about. He is younger than and Antipas, and he's going to gain great power. Let me give you a little background material that's come down from Josephus and others about who he is. Herod Agrippa I was raised in Rome. Herod the Great was killing his sons. It was a very dangerous place to be because he was jealous of all of them trying to take over. But Agrippa was sent to Rome to be raised. He was friends with Gaius, who would later be known as Caligula the Caesar. And so he was good friends with him and a big party friend that he had, I guess. And he lived with loose living and got into great debt and borrowing and got into trouble and had to leave Rome. And so he returned back to Palestine. And when he got there, he was so depressed he considered suicide, we're told. But his sister stepped in, Herodias. So you see how there's this intermarriage between these half-brothers and cousins and all of that in this family. Herodias and Herod Agrippa get married, right? And so he asked his sister to help him to get some government position. And Herod Antipas gave him the position of ruler of the city of Tiberias. It's one of the cities on the Sea of Galilee that was mainly a Gentile city. And he was leader there, but they were having a party, we're told, and Antipas looked down on him and was treating him rudely at a drinking party and made him mad, and he decided he would return to Rome. So he gives up ruling that city, and he borrows money from some other rich friends so he can go pay off his old debts that he had to go back to Rome. And when he gets back there, he renews his friendship with Gaius or Caligula. And at this time, of course, Tiberius is in his 70s. Tiberius Caesar's getting close to death. And we're told that about 6 months before he died, that Agrippa told some people at a party, and the Caesar overheard it, that he sure wished Tiberius would go ahead and die so that Caligula could take over. And so when Tiberius heard about this, he put him in prison along with some other people. But after he died, his friend Gaius or Caligula got him out of jail, and he gave his good friend the kingdom that used to belong to one of his uncles. He got some of this area of Lysanias was given to him. And so in 37, he's come back to Palestine, and now he is beginning to have this meteoric rise to being king over everything in Palestine. We're told that he was given by Caligula the title king. And people were very jealous of this title of being king. You remember Antipas is always called the tetrarch. He's not called a king. But Herod Agrippa, he gets called king. Well, Herodias can't have her husband having a lesser title. And so she says, you need to go to Rome and ask the Caesar to give you the title of king. And so they took a trip to Rome. But Agrippa heard they were going, and he sent some servants ahead to accuse Agrippa or Antipas. So you wonder what happened to that guy that beheaded John the Baptist and was the fox? Well, when he got to Rome, Caligula's in charge, and he accepts those charges that he hasn't been loyal, and he is exiled, he and his wife. And so he's no longer able to rule over Galilee and Perea. So Caligula takes that territory and gives it to Agrippa at that time. Then we're told, Caligula went crazy. He made one of his horses a senator. It was one of the things that he did. He killed a lot of senators. And as a result of all of his megalomania that he had, wanting to be a god, he wanted a statue set up in the temple in Jerusalem. And of course, the Jews, there would have been an immediate rebellion and war over that. And we're told that Agrippa was able to persuade him not to put the statue there. So he did that. And then later, he was so crazy, his own soldiers, the Praetorian Guard, killed him. And they took his brother, Claudius, and put him in as Caesar. And Agrippa's able to convince him of how loyal he has been and what a good servant of Rome he is. And so he gives him Samaria and Judea. So now he's got the whole thing at the time we're reading here in Acts chapter 12. He's got the whole area just like Herod the Great had. He has got it all. So now this powerful friend of Caesar is now king over all that area, and he wants to please the Jewish leaders, and he's going to persecute the church. Now, you think the church is in trouble? You'd think, looking at things out externally, the church is in big trouble because he's over the whole territory now, and he is out to get the church and persecute them in order to please the Jewish people. So he has all of that power from 41 to 44. Now, about that time, he decided he's going to lay hands on members of the church. He wants to gain the favor of the Jews, and Josephus tells us the same thing. He was doing this politicking with the Pharisees and the Nazarites and the religious leaders, wanting to gain their support for his kingship that he's got now. And some think, well, what's the reason for them being so stirred up against the church anew? Well, recently we've studied in Acts chapter 10 and 11 how the gospel has now spread to Gentiles. And we know the Jews and the Pharisees, they hate that idea, right? That Christ would have anything to do with Gentiles. So maybe that is part of what is behind the scenes also. And he wants to lay hands on them. You know, lay hands there is not the idea lay hands on like you're putting somebody in office and good job. But this is lay hands on to mistreat, to arrest and mishandle. And it's been about 8 years since Stephen was stoned. And that persecution ended when Saul was converted. So that came to an end. Now we got this king that's out to get the church. Verse 2, and he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. Now the first apostle has died for the faith. First martyr among the apostles takes place. James, the son of Zebedee, the brother of the apostle John, is put to death. And I don't know what all kinds of works that he had done in evangelism, why it was that he was the one they singled out to arrest. Maybe he did a lot of converting of people, had a lot of influence, but he's the one they pick on first and have him put to death. Then we're going to see when that pleased the Jews, they're going to go after Peter and try to take care of him as well. So he announces, he has him beheaded. So that was the execution by these civil rulers. They would behead people. And like John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod. Notice how brief this is. If you were writing the book of Acts as just a secular person, would you tell a little bit more than one line if it was you deciding what goes in the book of Acts? I think most secular writers, we'd have a whole chapter or two on James, right? And what he did and all of the sorrow the church felt and everything that happened. But the Holy Spirit is one of the things you see in inspired books is the brevity sometimes. That is this restraint that's put on these writers that they just give you the facts God thinks you need to know at this time and they move on. And you see that here in the book of Acts. Just in a few words in the Greek, he says, James was beheaded, and then we're moving on. 7 words are in that verse in the Greek. And shows that direction by the Holy Spirit and that restraint that he had. And what sets the Bible, one of the characteristics that makes Bible books different than secular books. And Jesus foretold that death of James, didn't he? We're going to study on Wednesday night when their mother comes on their behalf and asks that they might sit on his right hand and on his left in his kingdom. And Jesus said, are you able to be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? Are you able to drink the cup? Are you able to suffer what I'm going to have to suffer? And they said, yes. And they are going to drink the cup. And he drinks it right here. He's the first one to die for the faith. And then in verse 3, and when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now, it was during the days of unleavened bread. So, if that pleased the Jews, how much would it please them if he executed Peter also? What kind of a blow is that going to be? Apostle. And certainly we're in difficult days here in Acts chapter 12. He was mistreating these Christians because of influential Jews, and now it serves his political interest to arrest Peter. Isn't it lousy how politicians and people in power can be corrupted as far as righteousness is concerned? You have a job to be a righteous judge and enforce the law and care for your people, and he just trying to please certain powerful groups of people and takes away innocent people's lives in order to further his ends. He's arrested at the time of the Passover, and that turns out to be providential. They don't want to put somebody to death during a holy festival that's going on. So they're going to have to wait a few days until after the Passover feast is over. The days of unleavened bread, you took all the leaven out of the house, and then you had the Passover. And then there were 7 days of feasting afterwards that were the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the whole thing. And so they have another week in which they are going on with the festival that's taking place there. And it's not a good time to put this apostle to death. Verse 4, and when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So after he's laid hands on him and seized him and taken him into custody, he delivered him into the prison and put 4 squads of soldiers in charge of guarding this one man. Now think about that. 16 men to charge one prisoner. What do we know about what happened the last time Peter got arrested? You remember the story? What happened to Peter? What happened to all the apostles when they got arrested? They went to get them out of jail, and they were preaching in the temple. They'd been let out of jail by an angel, right? Or they'd been set free, told to go preach all the message of this life. So we're going to make sure he doesn't get out this time. We'll put 16 guys in charge. I guess they, had shifts. They'd come on and off guarding him. A couple chained to him in his cell. A couple at the door to make sure he can't get out. And so we're really going to take all action to make sure this apostle gets put to death. But all of the schemes and the plans of men, are they anything in comparison to God and what God can do? No. God created the whole universe in just a moment of time, right? He's not going to have any trouble getting Peter out of here if he wants him out, right? So this is going to end up being thwarted completely. So we got the plans. We're bringing him out. The feast is over. This is one of those places where you have, in all English translations, there's mistakes that are made and things that could have been translated better. It's true also the King James Version. In this place it says, instead of Passover, it says Easter. Easter is not the word there. That might have been the time of year, people in England thought about was Easter instead of Passover. But the word in Greek is Passover. Right? That's what it is there. So Peter was kept in custody, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church of God. So you got Herod on one side, you got 16 soldiers, you got a prison house, you got chains and all of that. What has the church got? We got prayer, right? We got prayer. We're talking to God. And that's powerful, right? That's more powerful than anything men can do. And they're praying to God about Peter. They're praying for his soul, praying for his safety, and so on. So they're praying on behalf, and they're doing it fervently, it says. What is the word fervently? It means eagerly, fervently, constantly, unceasingly. All of those ideas would be a right way to translate that word. So they're devoted to this prayer. They're not just praying one time about it, but they're persisting in their prayers for Peter. It's going on day in and day out. They're praying for him during that time of the unleavened bread feast and all. They're serious about what they're asking for and sincere. They're being importuning God to help them and praying during that whole time. And on the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. So there's 4 guards right there. One part of this 16 are there on watch. And you'd think if you're chained on you're in the cell with him, and then you've got 2 at the door, you're pretty good shape there to keep him in. So the very night when he's planning to carry this out, God steps in. Now, I'm sure the church would love to have seen him out a week before, maybe, right? But God does things on his time. He gets at the very last night he could get out. That's when he gets out. And that's when the Lord's going to set him free. He's sleeping there, and deliverance arrives. And it's pointed out by many brethren and scholars that have commented on this verse that not having a sleepless night. He's about to be brought out the next day to be executed, like his friend James, a fellow apostle. But he's sleeping. He knows he's right with the Lord. He's seen the Lord transfigured. He's seen him resurrected and ascended back to heaven. He knows that he's going to have life after death if he dies. So there's not a reason for him to not be able to sleep. To die and to go and be with Christ is very much better. That's what the Apostle Paul said, right? So in spite of all of these persecutions and all of these precautions, though, and the ingenuity of man, they're not going to be able to hold Peter in this jail. We're told in verse 7, and behold, and again, anytime you see behold, this is something extraordinary. You really need to pay attention to what I'm telling you when you say behold. Behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and roused him, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. So an angel, a messenger of God. That's what angel means, a messenger. A messenger from God comes down. And he is an immortal spirit that serves God. And he's come to take care of this of Peter. And he suddenly appeared. Without any warning, he became visible in that cell. We see that a number of times with the angels. There's a spiritual realm that surrounds us that we can't see with our eyes. You know, we just have certain spectrum we can see of light. There's a lot more light on either side of the spectrum, but we can only see this narrow range that you see in the rainbow, those colors. We can't see the spiritual realm either that might be surrounding. As you remember Elisha, the city was surrounded by soldiers from Syria, and the servant was afraid. And then the Lord opened that servant's eyes to see a whole army of angels that were around the outside of that army. And so sometimes people's eyes are opened up to see. Remember the donkey with Balaam? They ride along, and the donkey could see the angel, kept trying to get out of the way and running into the wall. And then Balaam's eyes were open, and he could see that angel standing there. So what is going on around us? We're blind to it, right? The spiritual realm here in the flesh. Unless God, in some extraordinary way, shows that to somebody. And we see it here in the cell. It has a heavenly light that shines. Just like when Jesus was transfigured and his face was shining brighter than the sun. And you see those angels that appeared to Daniel, and they're bright and shining and glowing. Same thing here. There's that heavenly appearance of this angel in that cell. And then he just has to hit Peter on the side sharply. Says, "Get up." She wakes him up. Tells him, you got to get dressed. Get up. Let's go. Chains fell off his hands. That's miraculous. Why did those chains come undone? Shows the power of God. It's not limited in any way whatsoever. And the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." So he's just Peter's kind of waking out of a dead sleep and in a stupor, and he's just, this angel's in complete charge. Get your belt, your girdle, and wrap it around. And get your sandals on your feet. We're leaving, right? We're fixing to hit the road. And get your cloak. You had your tunic that you wore underneath and your girdle, but you also had a big cloak that you wore, your outer garment, and you use that also for your blanket. You know, when you owed somebody money, they couldn't keep that overnight because everybody needs a blanket to be able to stay warm at night. So even when somebody owed you money, you had to give that back at nighttime so they could have their blanket. And so now he's following every command that the angel gives him to do here. And he went out and continued to follow. And he did not know what was being done by the angel. He did not know what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. So he thinks, I must still be asleep. Or this is all something God is presenting to my mind. He'd seen some visions of that sheet coming down, and it must be very realistic when you get a vision, I guess, that he thought, this isn't really happening. This is just something I'm seeing a vision here. And no miracle that was more complicated or more unexpected had ever been accomplished than this, that he comes in, takes the chains off, directs him to get dressed, takes him to the door, and this miraculous days is upon him. And we're going to see that the same thing happens to the guards, that they are evidently blinded to where they can't see. Even though they're awake and they're standing there on guard and they're in the cell, they're not able to perceive the things that are going on. And when they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that led into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. So guards are standing there. They're wide awake, evidently, but they are not able to perceive what's going on. Their minds are blinded. You remember where the disciples on the road, even though Jesus was walking and talking with them, their eyes were restrained from recognizing Jesus until he broke the bread. And then they recognized it was Jesus. There were some Syrian soldiers that were surrounding Elisha when those angels were there, and they were blinded mentally somehow to where they just led them into the capital city of the Jews of Samaria there, and they weren't able to perceive that they'd even been captured or anything yet. And so they get this mental blindness that comes upon them. Same thing happened at Lot's house, didn't it? Those wicked men were trying to get into Lot's house, and the angel blinded them so that they were wandering around. They couldn't find the door. Right? And then they get to the gate. If this is the fort of Antonia that's right there on this corner of the temple where Romans locked up people, there was a big gate there. I mean, even if you got loose in the prison, I mean, you still got to get out, right? Out of the gates and out of the wall or whatever that's there. But this gate just opens up all by itself. And look at the word in the Greek there that I have in the notes there. Automati, whatever. That's the word we get, automatic, that comes from that Greek word. It opened automatic. You know, that's something since I was a little kid, we go to the grocery store and the door's open for you, right? And all that never happened back then. I mean, this is a miracle taking place. And gets all the way outside the city and kind of around the corner and all, and then he is left by the angel and he really realizes, I've been set free, right? I'm really out of jail. God has delivered me. And when Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel and rescued me from the hands of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting. Now I know for sure that I'm free." And it sounds like a story. It's so vivid the way that it's told. I just wonder if Luke didn't hear Peter preach this story and tell the story himself a few times, and he could write it down for us, how Peter reacted and what he was thinking and what he was doing when all of these things happened. he received a good tale here about what happened. And again, wide awake now, he's got to go and find a safe place after the angel has left him. And he's been delivered from everything that Herod and the Jews had anticipated happening. I mean, they were, tomorrow we get to see another apostle put to death. Our enemies, these that are preaching the gospel, we're going to get rid of a big one tomorrow. But that's all been thwarted now. That's not going to happen. Verse 12, and when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. So here we find out about some other people in the church. There's Mary's house, and the church is meeting there, or at least a portion of the church is meeting there. And he comes to that house to leave word with the brethren about his escape and about where he's going, or that he's leaving, and let them know the circumstances of how he got away. And evidently Mary's house was a central location for people, that everybody knew about Mary's house. That would be an important place to go. And she has a son, Mark, who's also known as John. So a lot of times we call him John Mark, right? He's got two names, like a lot of people in the New Testament, a Greek and a Roman name that he goes by. And he is a young man that is a cousin of Barnabas, and Barnabas and Saul, they're going to come through Jerusalem and take John Mark with them, and he'll go on the first missionary journey. So here we're introduced to John Mark ahead of time, just like we were introduced to Barnabas and Saul ahead of their, big events later. Here John Mark's introduced by Luke. You see sort of a pattern there of the way that he introduces characters for us. And he is going to be a special helper. Of course, he wrote the Gospel of Mark, so he's a very important person. He helped Paul, and then later he is a special helper to Peter, and was with Peter in his latter days. And Paul found him very useful later in his life for service. So they're praying there in the house for his faith and for his courage. And here Peter shows up at the gate. And when he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. And when she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced Peter was standing at the front gate. How's that? It's something true to life. First bell? Okay. So Rhoda, which means rose, she comes to the gate. It's usually the servant girl would go see who's knocking at the door, and if she recognizes their voice, she'd let them in. If she doesn't, she wouldn't. And she goes to the gate, and she hears Peter's voice, which she recognized. And for joy that he is not dead and in jail, she just takes off and forgets to open the door for him. So he's still standing out, an escaped convict, out there in the street trying to find some safety, and the girl doesn't open the door. And he continues to knock. But this big front gate that they had to their courtyard there is where he's outside on the street knocking. And so filled with excitement, she just forgets herself and has to run tell everybody that Peter is out there. And they've all been praying that very night for him. And they said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so. And they kept saying, "It is his angel." So, say, "Girl, you've lost your senses. Peter is locked up. There's 16 soldiers guarding Peter." Doesn't it show even when you're praying for things sometimes? Evidently, they weren't really expecting him to get physically released, I guess. I don't know. They're shocked that he's actually does get released. They were praying for his welfare, and now God has answered them in such a marvelous way that they have trouble out of joy accepting the news when it comes, right? That he's out. He is out. He's knocking at the gate outside. And then they make this curious remark, well, maybe it's the angel. It says something about some of their beliefs that they had. Among the Jews, they had an idea you had a guardian angel. And evidently they thought this angel could sound like you and look like you, and his angels come and talk to us. Now, the Bible, the New Testament, doesn't teach that each individual has a guardian angel. It doesn't say that. But we do have angels that watch over little ones and that have faith and that minister to the saints, we're told in Hebrews 1 and verse 14. So certainly angels do have a role to play that we don't understand what all they're doing, but they do have a role to play. Again, we don't know what all goes on in that spiritual realm. We just have little glimpses of it. But Peter continued knocking. He's still out there. I got to get off the street. You know, just imagine, you don't want to wake up the neighborhood when you just got out of prison. Somebody needs to come open the door. And when they had opened the door, they saw him and were amazed, just shocked that Peter's standing there free and able to escape this certain death that was coming to him the next day. And don't you know they had a million questions they wanted to ask? How in the world did you get out? How did this happen? How do you come to be here? But Peter has got to make this short and quick. But motioning to them with his hands to be silent, calm down, he described to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison. And he said, report these things to James and the brethren, and departed and went to another place. So he quiets them down. He tells them the story as we've heard it here and lets the church know how he got out. And you go tell James, well, James the apostle's been put to death. This is James the Lord's brother that's a pillar in the church, one of the elders there, and the other brethren. Go let them, they're evidently meeting somewhere else. The whole church, I guess, is meeting in different homes and praying. And go let them know what has happened, and I have departed. And Peter went to some secret place. We don't know where that was because the Bible doesn't tell us where he went. We know when we get to Acts chapter 15 that Peter is back in the city of Jerusalem, and he is there when the Apostle Paul comes down and they look into the question, do Gentiles have to be circumcised and keep the law of Moses? That he's back there. So, what happened at the prison house? Verses 18 and 19. Now, when day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. Can you imagine what was going on at that prison? If you let a prisoner go, you suffer the penalty thereunder. What was Peter's penalty? Death. Now, this prisoner got away. Well, Lord willing, we'll come back and see the end of the story and what happens to Herod Agrippa when we have a chance next week.